So we know Brando Sando is big on his foils, where we've got similar characters, but who maybe have like one key difference, and that makes all the difference.
Right.
So we've got two survivors, right? Kaladin comes at it from the perspective of, no, I just keep surviving. I must be cursed by God to stand in witness of all my failures. Yada, yada. Our boy is the big sad. Versus Kelsier. Oh yeah, I just keep surviving. I am blessed by the gods. Although I will punch God in the face if I see him. I don't care. In fact, just feel free to worship me.
Yeah.
I'm a survivor.
They
I'm
are
not gonna
very
give
different.
up.
They're both-
I am gonna make it. Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Now I will survive.
Okay, great.
You can tell me to go and walk out the door. Go on now. I'm not welcome anymore. You should
If I
change
had
that
those,
stupid lock.
if I hear,
Should have
if
made
I
me leave the
had
key.
Those lyrics in my head, I would.
All right. I can stop here for like the actual music. Well, hello and welcome to Cosmere Casual, your casual reader's guide to Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. We take careful notes, chew up all the books, and then messily regurgitate them into your ears, like mama birds with their young. I'm your co-host, the very gross Nick Gorman.
And I'm your co-host, AJ Gorman.
Today, we're finishing up our discussion on The Way of Kings, Book 1 of the Stormlight Archive. We're breaking down the Cosmere connections in this book, so like the noteworthy things that to us stood out as being influenced by the other happenings in the Cosmere, and then the ripple effects that this book has elsewhere.
And there is going to be spoilers for everything that is published. We're definitely going to be talking about the entirety of Arc 1 of Stormlight.
Yeah. So that's through Wind and Truth. So that's books 1 through 5. We're going to talk about Mistborn through Era 2, I think. Tress of the Emerald Sea. And I've also got a bit of notes about like metatextual stuff, which I don't know. If you just want to enjoy the books on their own, maybe that you don't care about that, but it's nifty to me.
So let's start at the very, very beginning.
In the beginning.
In the beginning of the Stormlight, of
as far
the
as
Way of Kings.
Well, I was thinking even a little bit further back than that, right?
That's
so
true.
We get a little taste in this book of Adonalsium. We see Wit talk to Dalinar about that. I think it's just a name drop, though, right? Just to see if
There is a name drop, but then I think there's another reference to Adonalsium.
yeah. Do if you pull it apart and put it back together, would it be the same again? Mm-hmm. Now that
I have that quote.
a lot of the things that Wit says are cryptic, pun, and there's hidden meanings to them. And that one there's a lot of fan theories about why he says that to Dalinar, as well as we know from like Elantris and Mistborn Secret History. We seem to know that Wit is doing what he can to collect different types of investiture, right? Mm-hmm. Even the ones that need an invitation to access, like being an Elantrian.
Which I still fully don't understand.
Yeah. So his talk about breaking up and putting back together Adonalsium, there's something there. We don't know what it is.
Let me go get the quote here.
Oh, you actually wrote down the quote. I was just like, yeah, because I'll wait for you to get the quote, because then I wanted to go on a different tangent about.
I wonder if you could do that to a man. Pull him apart, emotion by emotion, bit by bloody chunk by bloody chunk, then combine them back together into something else, like, what was it, the Daisian Aemian.
Wait, did he say something about Daisian Aemians?
Yeah, he did.
Huh.
That's part of the quote. I just can't pronounce Daisian Aemian.
Brando's gone on the record that it doesn't matter how you pronounce it. He writes them down. You can do whatever you want with the pronunciations. So, but cool. I forgot that he had mentioned Daisian Aemians then. But yeah, so we know that when the shattering of Adonalsium was this formative event in the Cosmere before all of our books take place, and it involved the one supreme deity being broken apart into shards, right? And so that's where we
shards.
get 16 shards.
And we don't know the names of all of the shards, but we know a good chunk of them.
Anyway, and they're all named after things, primarily
not emotions,
not entirely emotions. Although odium is an emotion, hatred, right?
But then we have preservation,
it's honor, cultivation,
ambition,
and
I don't
autonomy.
know if that is emotion though.
It's something.
It's something.
But there was actually a different thing that I wanted to note, like, has strong parallels with the little bits that we know about the Shattering of Adonalsium, and that's the way the Oath Pact is broken, right? And the parallels there, I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but there was a group, not conspiracy might be a strong word, might not be, but there were perpetrators who betrayed their god. And there was an aspect of the heralds where they had agreed to take up the powers of that god, right? Not Adonalsium, but honor. And then there's a note that Jezreel says in that prelude about they agreed to go their separate ways, and they agreed to not interact with each other. And that's very similar to what we find out. I think we see more about that in the epigraphs of, I want to say Oathbringer. It might be Rhythm of War. But we see letters from the shards to Wit saying, I don't feel bad for them. We were supposed to keep growing planets, and they didn't.
And stay away from each other, and those people didn't. And those shards didn't stay away.
Similarly, the heralds seem to agree to stay away from each other, but we also, even in the prologue, the very next chapter, we see multiple heralds all interacting with each other.
Right.
Right?
I didn't think about those parallels.
Yeah. If you hear wailing and gnashing of teeth, it's just toddlers. That's just their natural state. So then I think you wanted to go into a character-by-character breakdown?
Well, actually, I want to talk a little bit about the settings. The Rosharan system contains 3 planets. All of these planets existed prior to the shattering of Adonalsium. There was the planet Ashen, which was already populated by humans.
Right. And so in Way of Kings, in all of Stormlight Archive, you see Ashen mostly referred to as the Tranquiline Halls. Yeah. That was where humans lived, sure, in harmony. Wink.
So when they talk about the battle for the Tranquiline Halls, they're talking about no one actually realizes that they're talking about the battle for a different planet, but we know that as the reader.
That's called dramatic irony, and you learned about that in English class.
Yes, hopefully.
Well, probably ignored it.
Then there is Roshar, which was already populated by however you want to call them, but the singers.
The Dawn Singers.
The Dawn Singers.
The listeners, the singers,
So when
Harshendi.
Ashen was lost, and because of Winds of Truth, we know that Honor and Odium were kind of doing a proxy war. So all the humans kind of left Ashen and fled to Roshar. And then the third planet is Braze, or most commonly referred to as
Damnation,
where the singers and the heralds are exiled to at the end of the Desolations.
Not the singers, the fused in particular.
The fused, yes.
And I think we learn more about that in particular in Wind and Truth, about why that's damnation, but it has some special properties. We'll get there.
We haven't seen Braze on screen, I don't believe. I don't remember seeing Braze on screen.
I don't remember. We've seen something. I don't remember if it's Ashen or Braze.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's we'll get there in Rhythm of War and Wind and Truth.
Yeah, so just as we were saying, call back to these planets and what they're commonly referred to among the common people. I have a quote here. Competition was doctrine to them. Vorinism taught that the finest warriors would have a holy privilege of joining the heralds after death, fighting to reclaim the Tranquiline Halls from the Voidbringers. So we now know that it's fighting to reclaim the planet Ashen.
Yeah, but I mean, that's not like something Honor or the Heralds was really interested in. They weren't going to go back to Ashen, right? So that's more like that's how the mythology, the theology evolved, right?
Yeah.
It's not based on a historical thing that the Heralds would do.
Is there some truth in here that we haven't, some grain of truth in here that we haven't yet discovered?
Maybe.
Because I don't know, I know the planet was dying.
They destroyed it with search binding.
But what does that mean? Can they eventually go back and heal the planet, or the planet heal on their own, or can they eventually go back to that planet? I don't know if we know that.
But
or not.
We don't know that. You're right.
So I think there's still more to think on this.
Yeah.
Especially since the Stormlight Archive should be spanning a long time.
Yeah.
And the Cosmere spans eons, so we could come back to this idea. Okay, going a little bit further in time, but still not quite back to present day. Let's talk about the prologue.
Okay, so the night of Gavilar's assassination.
Correct. So, I don't know about you, but reading about Zeth, and particularly the lines about him, Brandon really points out, he said, Zeth did not sway to the beat of the drum, or danced, or anything. And that just kind of killed me a lot more on this reread, knowing how much he liked to dance and sway and dance with the wind as a kid. So
as dancers ourselves.
Also that too. But yes, so the reread was a little bit more heartbreaking for me.
That's fair. I don't know if I want to say that this is him at his lowest low, but it's probably the lowest low he's been at this point in his life, because he was pretty, if I remember right, the timing wise, he was pretty freshly exiled by this point, right, out of Shinovar. He was freshly made a truthless.
Yeah.
So like yeah.
When he kills Gavilar, Gavilar says, "They must not get it. Tell my brother he must find the most important words a man can say." So even after reading Gavilar's point of view, I still don't fully understand what he's referencing. Maybe I just, because I've only read Winds of Truth once.
Wind and Truth once.
But they must not get it. I'm assuming that's the Void Light Sphere.
Oh, I'm trying to think about the context, because he's talking about basically his deals falling through with Thydakar, Kelsier.
And then he wants the most important words a man can say.
Well,
he
wants to become a herald, right? Even more than becoming a Knight's Radiant, right?
Well, Gavilar wants to become a herald. So
right.
Does he want Dalinar to become the herald in his place?
Presumably. But you're right. I would need to go back and reread Wind and Truth again, because he was also talking to the Stormfather.
Right.
Not really to Zeth, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. I know. I kind of want to do a deep dive into the prologues as their own thing,
We'll get there eventually.
as we get there later on. Because there's a lot to keep track of, and I haven't gone through and done my due diligence on it yet.
Kalek, so going back to the prelude.
Yeah. The one several thousand years ago.
Kalek is the one that eventually becomes the judge over Adolin's trial.
Yep.
I did appreciate a little bit more context with the Wind and Truth that Gavilar was... Well, I guess I'm still a little confused. Gavilar was so interested in the Parshendi because he wanted a second oath. He wanted access to a second oath gate, right? Because he also thought that there was an oath gate on the Shattered Plains. So he was looking for that trade treaty so that he could have transportation. He could control 2 distant oath gates.
I think as far as we're really concerned in the Way of Kings, like, it's still supposed to be kind of mysterious, right? It's like we can revisit that, later.
Yeah.
I was about to say, it's like, I don't know. I've read like 3 or 4 books after Wind and Truth. This one, it's like, that's not what I was here. That's not what I've got my notes focused around talking about.
I know, but in Way of Kings, Shallan and I have a discussion about like why did he actually want this treaty?
Right. So his end goal was to become a herald, right? He wanted to become an immortal ruler, and so there were a lot of stepping stones up to that, right? Where he was working with Kelsier, Thydakar to get investiture and ultimately cognitive shadows like the heralds off planet, because as it stands right now, Stormlight, Spren, and heralds are all very closely tied to Roshar. They've got a very strong connection, and they can't go very far off world, whether through Shadesmar or other means, right? If I remember,
which is not easily explained when you read the books. This is all putting it together from Reddit and other things. So if you miss this, don't worry about it.
Well, and I think it's put a little bit more straightforward in... Well, anyway, whatever. Yeah, and that point is made explicitly clear in Mistborn Secret History and Wind and Truth, I believe, where there are people trying to get off world, right? And with the amount of investiture that they have, it's challenging.
I still don't think is as explicit as it could be, but yes.
Yeah, right. And so what Gavilar found on the Shattered Plains was he thought there was an oath gate. He saw listeners, and they had ancient artifacts, right, that he hadn't seen before, right? And you also got to remember that he had Axendweth and Vasher as advisors, and Axendweth, we don't really know her motivations yet, but she was presumably, given by how she's the one who gives the Void Spren to Venli in Rhythm of War, she was probably trying to twist Gavilar to her own purposes, whatever those were.
What is she, her connection again?
We know that she's a Feruchemist.
Okay.
She might or might not be a Ghostblood.
Okay.
But she's some kind of scholar.
Some third party.
Right. So, so we don't know what she was at, but she might have been, trying to get Gavilar to go further in that direction to get the Parshendi to eventually summon an Everstorm, right? Because,
I don't see how a trade treaty gets further that aim, but...
Well, because it keeps her as a human in contact with the listeners,
sure.
Right? So that way she can slip the Void Spren.
Nice. All right. Fair enough. Okay. Moving on. Still talking a little bit about Gavilar. Also, I noticed on this reread that Dalinar's memory of Gavilar, and then contrasting it with
the hell, man?
Getting Gavilar's perspective and like seeing how he treats Navani. It's just like,
Tree
the
one.
puzzle pieces don't fit here, guys.
Well, and like how he treats everybody, but like the closer you are to Gavilar, the worse he treats you, right?
Well, Navani says that like a lot of his closer, like his children still treat him well because he pretends to be a good person for them, supposedly. It seems like it's more pointedly on Navani that he pushes away and treats horribly.
Yes, but he's more subtle and manipulative about it with Dalinar, but like he's no less. Yeah, I mean, arguably
well, I don't think you
less
really have to
terrible.
hide much from Gavilar when he
but
Dalinar because he's drunk off his ass a lot of the time, but I'm probably pretty clueless. He hadn't had his kind of reawakening thing, but yeah, it's just super difficult to read Dalinar kind of idealizing Gavilar after having read Gavilar's point of view. And I really hate saying Dalinar and Gavilar close together.
Yeah, anyway, yeah. Very similar names. You don't think we should have named our kids Braden and Jaden and Graydon?
No, absolutely not.
All rhyming names.
Nope. Okay. So I feel like the entirety of Stormlight Arc 1 was set up for Kaladin to become a herald. And this starts in book 1. So I want to kind of point out a lot of the ways where this was kind of being set up. I have a quote here. It didn't matter where he was a slave, he'd still be a slave. He'd accepted his life. That was his way now. Don't care, don't bother. So not a great kind of mindset to have. Definitely not something that was kind of herald-like at the beginning. So there's definitely some
Heraldic.
But accepting your life and kind of not being stuck in one thing is definitely, I feel like, a mindset that you have to kind of become used to having if you're going to live for eons. I don't know.
I think you're stretching a bit there.
Okay. If Cal had gone to Kharbranth like he was supposed to study medicine,
be a surgeon, yeah.
He would have been dead.
Why do you say that?
Because Kharbranth was drowned.
Well, he was going to go there to study, but then ideally he would leave and...
I don't think I think he still would have been studying at the time because it does take years to study. Yay, cosmic chess, because Kaladin got to live.
I mean, I feel like that because Kaladin also had like a big sway on events that led to Kharbranth being destroyed.
True.
So I'm not really sure. I don't think I agree with that.
One of the few things, I think we talked about this in the other episode, but one of the few things that we learn as Kaladin as like an individual before he kind of had a hard life is that he wanted to travel the world and see what other lands were like.
He gets that.
And do you think that's going to extend to him wanting to travel to other planets? Because that could be a problem since he's becoming a herald and he's going to be tied to the Rosharan system.
Well, I was about to say, because it's also... He's a different person than he was as a child. So, like, I guess, yeah.
And I'm also wondering, like, this whole Arc 1 is kind of him going through a lot of mental things of, like, people in power. Like, am I helpless? Like, does doing anything help anybody? Because I'm, one person. I think at the end, when he takes up, the herald spot, he's in a good place at that point. But do you think he's going to have to repeat that journey again after he's become a herald because of a whole new kind of expanded context to that?
Your mental health journey doesn't have a finish line. And that's something that I'm sure many therapists have said. And now that Kaladin is a magical therapist, we're not there yet. Why are we talking about that? Let's say, that's so far ahead. Come on, let's keep it, Way of Kings.
Okay, all right, let's move on to Yalb then.
Okay.
I think Yalb is a sleepless.
You think... No, he can't be a sleepless.
Why can't he be a sleepless?
So, compare to Dawn Shard, where we get a lot of discussion about the sleepless and where they are at this point in the history of the Cosmere. I forget the name. I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but I'm just like the main sleepless in that book had to go through some reasonably extraordinary measures to hide the fact that he was sleepless, like having a ton of tattoos everywhere, and I don't think we see Yelp described in the same ways. And I'm not saying that it's impossible, I'm just saying it's impossible for at this point in the Cosmere, because he would have to be like just a more better able to fit in with human society than that one who was whose name I'm blanking on from Dawn Shard was able to, and he was supposed to be the best at blending in.
Okay. I don't know. There's some fishy things going on.
Is it fishy because he's a sailor and a fisherman?
No. But
Maybe. I think he's just
so
a
he does.
fan
So
favorite.
here's a quote. It ain't gambling if you know you're going to win, young miss.
Yeah.
Okay, so miss. That was the only time that we heard the word miss in the entire Stormlight Archive. Okay, so it could be a slip up from being on another planet.
Well, I think because he's also I didn't think that he was, because he's a Thalen and he wasn't speaking his native language there. I forget whether he was speaking
I don't know.
Alethi or
I'm just thinking.
Vaden, but it's like, well, hold on.
That's the only time someone gets referred to as a young miss.
And he's not proper to call her brightness.
He says, "I think I might not have walked away with my skin if you hadn't arrived." That didn't seem to worry him much.
Well,
Could be a small nod to his immortality.
he's not immortal. Although then again, he does.
It could help if he's a sleepless. That could somehow help him be how he cheats. And we haven't gotten to this point, but he survives the wind's pleasure sinking. He has very good hearing. Shalon notes that he comes in just at the right time to interrupt her buying her books. And he says gammer for his grandmother, which could also be kind of language he picked up on another planet. But
Do you think he's a Khandra? Because I know.
Or it could be a Khandra, yeah.
There's a word of Brandon that there is a Khandra on Roshar, but we don't have any strong leads or clues about who it is.
I think there's something going on with Yalb.
And you're starting to convince me there too, because I'm just like, nah, he's
Sleepless
just
Khandra,
a dude.
something's going on with Yalb.
Maybe.
All right, that's all of the very thin circumstantial evidence that I have on Yelp. So let's talk about Sigil.
He barely has a part in this book. He's just one of the other Bridge 4 folks.
I know, but I'm finding it more and more difficult to piece Sigil together because I feel like every time we get introduced to him, it feels like a completely different character to me. Because I notice in this reread, because generally I just think, bridge person number 1, bridge person number 2, they're all
They all might as well be wearing red shirts.
Yeah, they're all interchangeable, but I notice in this reread...
Well, they're expendable.
Yes, I notice in... Yes.
Literally, that's the point. Anyway.
I notice in this reread that Sigil was actually a really stark dissenter at the beginning against Kaladin.
Yeah.
To the point where he's, mean. He says, "Oh, bridge leader, you think that you're grand? That you're better than us? You think pretending that we're your own personal troop of soldiers will change anything?" And it's just... And after we get to know Sigil, after he's kind of not in mortal danger, that is just not something that he would say. And I realize when you're at your lowest low that you're not going to sound or do the same things that you would do when you're under normal circumstances, but still it seems so far out of character that it's hard for me to in my mind to make them the same person.
That is very much something that Nomad would say.
So that's what I'm saying. I can't put all of these characters together. They just don't want to mix.
So what I'm hearing from you is that who Sigil is when he's under immense, unlikely to survive pressure is different from who he is when he's under the sort of pressure to be his best self, right? They're different kinds of stresses because when he's in charge of Bridge 4 in leading an army kind of sense, he's more of a bookish kind of guy,
right?
And he seems more reserved,
Right.
But when he's constantly on the run, whether that's on the run from the Night Brigade or running bridges, he's meaner.
Yeah, they just seem like two completely different people to me than one person who's acting differently because of stress. My brain's having a hard time.
I accept it, and I also, I don't know how to say it exactly like this, but this was one of the first books, or this was, I think, because Mistborn, the first trilogy, had been all the way written before the first one was published. He had not gotten so far with Stormlight Archive before The Way of Kings was published. So there might have been changes in direction with certain characters, and Sigil might be one of those.
It could be.
And that's just...
normally Brandon has things so planned out, even not maybe not written out fully, but like they're normally planned out enough that there's not quite these discrepancies. But I suppose he's allowed some.
People can change, characters can change. I don't know.
I don't know. It's going to be very interesting reading Sunlight Man again.
Yeah, I'm just, but you're right. It's one of those things where,
It's also hard because we listen to the audiobooks and they're different narrators. They literally sound different.
yeah, and like the delivery is different.
I don't know why. Why did Brandon change narrators?
Well, we can talk about that on a Sunlight Man episode.
Okay.
Like there were reasons.
All right. Hoyd?
God, Hoyd. Yeah, I don't have any notes written about him specifically because I didn't really.
So Hoyd Wit gives Kaladin the flute in this book,
Sphandrius.
Way of Kings.
Yep.
Takes 5 books for that exchange to
Pay off.
but it does eventually pay off.
Well, it comes up a few times.
But really, like the true payoff isn't until book 5.
Yeah.
I would like to note that Dalinar mentions that Wit has a sword that he's never drawn. That is because of the Dawn Shard that apparently he's currently holding. He can't harm others, so he can't draw the sword. I did notice that one of the comments he made, the very first comment that he made when he arrives on the scene as an explanation for why he kind of left, he says, "I had things to be about." So this is right before the Chasm Fiend hunt. What things do you think he was about?
I mean,
Do you think we'll find out? Or is this comment supposed to just add to his mystique?
I think it's part of his mystique. Do we want to get into the metatextual stuff about Hoyd?
Sure.
Right, stuff from Words of Brandon. We know that he has a lot of access to fortune, right? So he
Which means what exactly?
He doesn't, well, it's a little bit different, different ways. He's got ways to see into the spiritual realm, right? And so for him...
In future.
No, he can't see into the future like that, but not the same way he would as if he were burning adium or something, but he generally has an inkling of where he ought to be for significant events. He just doesn't know why or what the significant events are. Mm-hmm. Right? Yep. And I think that's a mix of Words of Brandon and, cryptic things that he says.
So he can show up to an event. I think I forget it was the Word of Brandon or something where like he can like show up to a place and then just like sit there for a minute and just be like, nope, this isn't where I'm supposed to be.
But yeah, so like, so from that perspective, he's got, he's got fortune. He's very fortunate that way. So he can see into the future some. And, he's, I think, the most prominent world hopper that we've seen on screen so far, right?
Right.
So, I mean, he might have just been, around doing stuff. Didn't feel like being on Roshar. What ifs?
Who knows? I do think it's funny how Dalinar doesn't seem to notice that Wit does respect him and doesn't actually insult him. Dalinar just chooses to be offended on the behalf of everybody.
So, the first time I read Way of Kings was well before I'd read Secret History, right? And I was confused. I mean, I had to suspend some disbelief, which you generally do when you're reading science fiction fantasy anyway, right? But I had to suspend my disbelief about the insults that Wit was throwing out there, because I'm like, they're not that insulting, right? It's just kind of, it's like, middle school stuff, right?
Right.
Like, oh, you're a butthead, whatever. And then after reading Secret History, and then I think it was somebody on Reddit pointing it out, it's like, he's almost certainly rioting and soothing the High Prince's emotions to get more of a reaction out of them. He's manipulating their emotions with his insults and presumably with allomancy to get the result that he wants, right?
That's cheating.
To, get reactions, but then, not, when he feels like he's gone too far, okay, don't kill me. Don't kill me yet. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't feel like I need to suspend disbelief because with the upper crust, like any slight insult is to be taken seriously. But Wit also had a comment about he had tried to impersonate a leader on a different world. So I wonder if we're going to get that story.
I don't remember that. Yeah, I don't remember the comment.
I didn't write down the exact quote, but there was something in there. Okay, Ghostbloods.
Ghostbloods.
The people who tried to kill Yasna.
Yes. So we know that Lindavar, Shallan's dad, and Kabzal and a few other people are Ghostbloods, but we don't really know how high in the ranks, like how much they know really. But there's a few side references that haven't really been explained yet. Like Shallan sees kind of nonsense maps in his study. They're probably just maps of other worlds or Shadesmar, right? because that's
I didn't think of maps
what-
of other worlds.
right. Because I mean, we even see maps of other worlds that Ela Sadius has in Rhythm of War, and that's she gets from intercepting communications from the Ghostbloods, right?
Right.
So presumably that's the same sort of information that Lindavar had, right? But I noticed in this read, well, I'm going to say a few read throughs, it was noteworthy to Shallan that her father had forbid her from spending time with the Parshmen. And the first time I read it, you read it like, it's just plain old racism, right?
Right.
He just thinks that he's better and doesn't want his daughter associating with them. But could it have been more? Could he have known the nature of Parshmen, or in the history of that with the Desolations? So it's, there's stuff there, and we really just don't know how much, I don't know. This time,
Even still after book 5. It is.
even still after book 5, right? I'm not sure we're really gonna find out how much he knew because of this. I mean, it might become relevant when we find out, what even were the Ghostbloods' plans with Lindavar, right? Why did they want him to be increasing in influence? What did they think that he could bring to them? Was it?
Because it wasn't Shallan.
No, probably not, but maybe, right? And we don't know the timing of when he became a Ghostblood. Was it before or after
His wife's death.
his wife's death? Was it before or after he even got married to her?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know. So I tried this time to keep track of who all was associates with Shallan's family, and I couldn't keep up.
I don't think anything makes. I think it's purposely vague.
Yeah, but to me, that's yet another explanation for why Yalb, as someone on the Wind's Pleasure who had a long-standing association with the Devars, he could just have been highly invested. That would explain the heightened senses, being a world hopper, right? But he was ethnically Thaylen, so yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have any answers there, so much as pointing out like there's stuff.
There's definitely stuff.
I guess sort of a parallel between Shallan and the magic system in Mistborn. The way that Shallan holds memories, where she captures a discrete memory and is able to hold it into her mind until it's copied down, is very reminiscent of how copper mines work for Feruchemists in Mistborn, where we see says it all the time, pulling out memories, they get a little bit worse and fuzzier, and then he deposits them back in his copper mines, right?
Right.
So that's it's very reminiscent of that.
Okay.
I mean, that's all I really had about the Ghostbloods and specific tie-ins with Mistborn.
Well, except I guess for what we know for Wave Kings right now.
Yeah.
Midnight Essence. So we saw Midnight Essence in one of the what is it called?
Visions. In the first vision that we joined Dalinar on as readers, he fights creatures made of Midnight Essence, that oily black thing, right? And so later on in Oathbringer, we see those. They're revealed to be creatures of Race Shafir, who's one of the Unmade, and otherwise known as the Midnight Mother. But they're always those midnight creatures are very similar in appearance to the servants of the sorceress from Tress of the Emerald Sea, right? And they're made out of the Midnight Aether.
Yeah, so I thought Midnight Aether and Midnight Essence were the same thing.
I thought there was. I'm not as diligent about keeping track of Words of Brandon as you are, but I thought we had it on a Word of Brandon that Midnight Aethers are not directly related to Race Shafir, but they're both separately manifestations of some underlying principle of the way the Cosmere works, related to Midnight Essence.
So we don't know.
So we don't really know, but sort of the commonalities there is that the Midnight Essence is a thing that can be used to create independent or at least quasi-independent creatures, right? Where Ray Shafir and is able to create these little minions that have a vague intent with them, and that's similar to the way the sorceress uses the Midnight Essence, right?
Right.
She's got a generic shape, vague sort of instruction. It's different from Awakening, where the thing already has its shape, and you have to be a very specific command.
Yeah. I think that's a limitation of the person who's giving the command, but yeah.
Well, I guess midnight creatures do appear to have like a greater degree of independence, and we get the sense that they have other limitations because, like, if you were to poke a lifeless with a little fire poker the way Dalinar does, it wouldn't die, right? But it seems to have an impact on the Midnight Essence creatures. So there, we don't exactly know what the limitations are in the same way that we know.
My brain hurts.
Okay, we can move on.
We'll find out more.
We
This will
will.
make more sense later, right?
Probably. I don't think, I don't think.
Let's go with yes.
Yeah.
Let's go with yes.
Yeah.
Let's take a break and do something a little bit more fun. You said you had metatextual stuff?
Yeah. So in this book, we're introduced to the phrase life before death, strength before weakness, journey toward destination. In the book, that's the first ideal of the Knights Radiant. And in real life, that's live, laugh, love for nerds. There's so many posts on Reddit of people getting it out of tattoos, book covers, pillow covers. Like, it's a very motivational quote, and I like it too. And unironically, at some point, I will get a notebook with that, emblazoned on it. It is sort of the, as far as motivational quotes go, it's like, oh yeah, I'm the basic bitch of the fantasy community,
Great.
So
Let's talk about queer.
yeah, okay. So it's a thing with male fantasy and sci-fi writers, like that they tend to over-sexualize women in their works, right? E-Money tends to be a counterexample, but if you want, examples of bad men writing women, there's a subreddit for are men writing women, where, yes, her breasts bounced boobily as they went, it's, just dumb stuff, over-sexualized stuff. And like I said, B-Money tends to not fall into that category.
Except
But it was very noteworthy to the fandom that Yasna, and Yasna alone is sort of described in terms that focus on her beauty, her majesty, her unmistakable grace.
which
and
of course is
from
only from Shallan's perspective.
only from Shallan's point of view. And like, even that she's well endowed, right? And it's like, she's curvy in all the right ways and, thin and all that. It's like, okay, yeah. That's so.
See,
the urban legend in the community that I've heard. Oh, you had a thought.
As a woman, we also kind of compare ourselves to other women. So to me, it did not read the way you're about to describe. But go ahead, describe what the internet thinks.
So the urban legend in the community, which I could have verified, but I don't like going through and digging through all words of Brandon and interviews and everything like that. But the urban legend was that basically fans pointed out how Shallan is the only one whose point of view sexualizes women in their description. And after being asked about it repeatedly, Brando Sando retroactively decided that Shallan is bisexual. And I think that actually, and you can tell when that becomes more open in like Rhythm of War and, and you see it with Shallan's altars, where they are more, she gazes more lustily after women as well.
Yes.
And I didn't take as detailed notes as I would have liked for this episode, but the one that that really stood out to me was that, Shallan, there's a few instances where she's drawing Yasna, and one of those she describes it as a euphoric thrill to be drawing her. And I'm like, yeah, that's euphoric.
I do not remember reading that, but okay.
The other stuff I have about metatextual stuff is, because I'm not, there's a ton of other memes that, we've kind of hit on in cold opens, right? Where everything is crabs. There's, Syl as a Tinkerbell style therapist. There's, and then there's other stuff that's going to become more relevant later on in the Cosmere, so I'm kind of trying to keep it in the back pocket about Dalinar and his storm wagon. She's
Storm wagon?
He has a very good butt, according to Lyft. An untrustworthily good butt. And so there's a lot of
So his
memes.
butt is a storm wagon?
Yes, indeed. It's not a dump truck, because they don't have dump trucks. They got storm wagons. Anyway.
Dunk. Okay.
Yeah. He's caked up.
Okay. Let's take it back to shards. There's quite a few references to the shards in this book. A lot of them were in the death rattles at the beginning of the chapters. I've got a few here. 3 of 16 ruled, but now the broken one reigns. So those 3 shards are cultivation, honor, and odium. Those 3 of those shards kind of ruled somewhat balanced at the beginning, but now odium reigns.
Really? You think odium reigns?
I think so.
Huh. Because the prominent religion across all the world is Vorinism, which worships honor as the almighty, Honor's the one who's most explicitly broken. Their whole society is set in a rigid caste system where your own honor and your family's honor is very important, at least in the Warren societies and in different societies as well. I think it's meant to be ambiguous. I'm less certain. The more I think about it, the less certain I am
About who the broken one is.
who the broken one reigning is, right? Because yes, Odium's influence is certainly felt, right? Especially in the Alethi Thrill, right? Especially
Which is
in
another unmade.
yeah, which is one of the unmade. Especially in the death rattles that Nurgle does, who's another one of the unmade, right? But I just the
Can we take a second? Can you just explain what the unmade are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets, pretty cool. Maybe not clearly. It gets much more clearly articulated by Oathbringer, but they are Big Spren, right? But Big Spren of Odium, where they're
And there's 9.
there's nine of them.
9 unmade, yeah.
They don't have a lot in common with each other. Some of them are very intelligent, like your Ba Edom Ishram or Ja Anat. And there are some who are
More feral, like feral, like
Feral?
like the thrill.
like really sure if Nurgle even has feelings.
I don't even.
We've seen it on screen, right? And then the Heart of the Revel, right? Like it just, I forget what the fantasy sounding name for it is, but it's the one that takes over the
It's the life of the party.
yeah, the life of the party. Party till you drop.
Okay. Getting back to the shards. Another one of the death rattles was they break the land itself. They want it, but in their rage, they will destroy it. I do believe that is a reference to Honor and Odium. They kind of had one of their first minor clashes is what destroyed Nat and Natin and created the Shattered Plains. Because Odium and Honor are fighting over the Rosharan planet.
They also literally destroyed Ashen.
Well, that too. Yes. I guess it could be Ashen.
Yeah, but I mean,
But like
the
break
future
the
tense
but
there. Yeah.
they break the land itself, especially being introduced to the Shattered Plains this book. I think this one's talking about Shattered Plains.
Okay.
And because
Did I go on my rant last episode about the death rattles? They're not trustworthy. I mean, even if they're true, they're so vague and ambiguous
and sometimes
as to mean anything.
sometimes they're referencing the past, and sometimes they're referencing the future, or we don't
not,
know.
And sometimes they're not actually death rattles. Like there was one where it was clearly somebody seeing a cryptic as the surgeon was taking his blood away out of him.
Yeah.
So it's like, they're, I don't know.
They're glimpses of maybe something that's helpful, maybe not.
Yeah. And in general, in the Cosmere, visions of the future can be changed, especially when other people view the future. So, like, they become less reliable as time goes on. Anyway.
Well, I'm going to skip that note. We can talk about that another time. One of the quotes we have of, I think, Wit writing to somebody else was, Ati was once a kind and generous man, and you saw what became of him. Ray's, on the other hand, was among the most loathsome, crafty, and dangerous individuals I have ever met. So, Ati is was a vessel of...
The Vessel of Ruin.
Ruin.
Right? And so, by the time we see him in Mistborn Era 1, he's, there is no more Ati. It is just ruin.
There's nothing really left of Ati's personality. And Wit's point is that Ray's, the vessel for Odium, kind of started off as pretty shitty human being.
Presumably human. Do we know that he was human?
I don't know. He appears as human. Well, I guess he appears as whatever race he's talking to. So,
whatever
race. I think his point is just that, right, instead of having your vessel and the shard be counterpoints, that they're actually feeding off each other. And that's probably not the best thing.
When the shard is hatred.
Yes, but I think the lesson to learn here is that shard intents do take over the vessel eventually, but possibly not completely. But it begs another question: like, if Ray's was such a loathsome individual, why was he part of a gang to destroy Adonalsium?
We don't know yet.
I know. It bothers me.
Presumably, we're gonna get that story, but I would anticipate that he had something that was needed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we get a little bit of that from Wind and Truth, where, he talks down to to Tanavast, calls him Tanner. It's like, you were always lowly, so presumably Reyes was a wealthy and powerful individual before the shattering. Presumably. It's just speculation.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about realmatic theory.
You don't want to talk about, philosophy?
You can talk about philosophy. Let's do that.
So I like the Stormlight Archive I like basically idiots' guides to teaching philosophy, right? Because as it turns out, I never studied philosophy, but like it's kind of an important thing. So, there's
Can't
a lot
get a
of
job
that.
with it, but yeah.
Anyway, so you see different people start to embody or talk about things in ways that you would expect with different ethical philosophies in particular. So Dalinar has a few things that stand out as like a stoic, and I think the quote that most embodies that is in chapter 26 he says, "I feel all those things you mentioned, Sadius, Dalinar said, eyes forward, but I don't always let them out. A man's emotions are what define him, and the control is the hallmark of true strength. To lack feeling is to be dead, but to act on every feeling is to be a child." Right? And so that's stoicism in a nutshell, right? Where you don't, you feel things, but you don't let them,
Dictate your behavior.
Right. But, I guess overall, like in terms of like the ethics of the thing, Dalinar seems to be more like a deontologist where it doesn't matter what the end results are at all, but it matters what your
Before destination.
right. And I guess the strict definition is the morality of actions is based on rules and principles. So for him, it's about, so if he makes a promise, he's going to keep it. When he tells the bridgemen that he will free them, everybody is shocked that he's willing to give up his shard blade to do it. But to him, it's like, yeah, I was going to do it no matter what. So
Well, if this is the only way to keep my promise, like, of course I'm going to do it.
Of course I'm going to do it. And that's also like why he's so concerned about like courting Navani. To him, it's wrong to be courting a family member.
Even if there's no explicit rules against it.
Right. In contrast, Taravangian is a, obviously utilitarian, right?
The ends justify the means.
Yeah, the ends justify the means. And we don't see too much of that in this book, except we see it in him running the hospitals to try to get their prophetic death rattles, even if they're not reliable, right? Because to him,
having that information, even
Yeah.
if it helps only a little bit, is worth it.
Yasuna seems to be a pragmatist. She's not. I stopped taking my notes right then, and it's like I don't really know how to describe that. I'm very much she. Some of the things she does are reminiscent of what Taravangian does, right? Where she's willing to go and kill those street thugs, for because they were a menace, right? And the way that she does it is, basically she draws the foul, right?
Right.
But she's not super concerned with the ultimate ends. She's not super concerned with doing things the right way. She's more concerned about what's the most I don't want to say the most
good.
pragmatic, right?
Yeah.
But like
the most good from the least amount of harm or something. Maybe.
Well, that's still kind of a utilitarian way of looking at it. Like what's possible? What can I actually do here?
Yeah.
Right. And so yeah, that's the way I look at Yasna. And again, just sort of to round out the troops of folks who focus so much on ethics, Kaladin seems mostly to embody virtue ethics, where he does get caught up an awful lot on what's right and what's wrong. But for him, it's less about having a code or a rule or principle, and it's also not about the ends justifying the means. For him, it's about being a good person.
What feels right to him. Right.
And once you are a good person, you won't really have to think that hard about it. You'll just do the right thing, right? And so, I mean, we see that especially in Words of Radiance, Oathbringer, and The Way of Kings, where he's not ready to say words, or he does wrong, he becomes a worse person, and then, that's effectively breaking his oaths, right? Or he's not ready to say the words, even if he knows what the words are, but he's not ready. He's not, as a person, ready yet. So that's why it's sort of like he embodies that ethical framework.
Gotcha.
Push up my glasses. All right, I'd say nerd section is over, but frankly, we're making a fan cast for sci-fi fantasy books, so nerd section continues in a different way.
All right, let's just do a quick review of realmatic theory. So realmatic theory is the theory that
It's how the Cosmere works, where there's a physical world, a cognitive realm, and a spiritual world. Realms.
Cognitive, spiritual, and then particularly the way that plays out on Roshar is that each object kind of has a soul. In the cognitive realm, that comes about with a bead. That object shows up as a bead, but the object does kind of have a memory or kind of thinks about itself in certain ways.
That's not a Rosharan thing. That's
the
everything
whole
in the Cosmere.
Yes. Well, different planet, the objects show up as different things.
That's true.
On different planets. There are a couple references to this in small ways. I think Kaladin thinks at one point it was if the spear itself knew what to do, and it does because the object thinks of it as a sphere and does know what to do and likes being what it is and doing what it should be. And then I think Kaladin said he said sorry. He whispered to it, though he didn't know why. I think Kaladin has kind of a somewhat innate sense, along with a couple of our other characters, that these objects do have kind of intense and kind of something more to them than just a simple object.
I don't think it's innate. Because we see in the flashbacks, Kaladin's mom telling him over and over again, everything has a spren, right?
Yeah, or a soul. Yeah,
right. Everything has a soul. Everything has a spren, and we see that in some of the interludes. You can see that in our interludes episode.
Yeah, but being taught it and being kind of like internalizing that enough to be to say sorry to an object is a little different. We see this with Shallan, so we get this explained to us a little bit further later in the series, but you were mentioning that because Shallan has she has bonded two Spren at once, she can see into the spiritual realm. And I never really paid attention to this, but there are references to this in her drawings, even in Way of Kings. One of the quotes here I have is, when she drew, she didn't feel as if she worked only with charcoal and paper. In drawing portrait, the medium was the soul itself.
Well, and it's funny.
Which is just Brandon coming out and saying it like point blank.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes.
But souls are important, and Brandon wouldn't have described it in this way if we weren't supposed to read it that way.
There's another quote that she has one of the few that I wrote down.
Yeah.
She describes collecting memory as snipping free a bud of their soul, which then grows on its own.
Yep.
Most, I think, controversially in the fandom, at the end of Wind and Truth, we see the Blackthorn as its own identity, its own little snippet of Dalinar's, a bud taken off of Dalinar's soul.
Yeah.
Being its own entity, fed by the perception of Blackthorn as something different from Dalinar.
So Shallan seems like she could come a real badass.
Yeah. Well, but it's also that's just
another application.
Right. It's in the way that she's just it's presaging things, right? Foreshadowing.
Point being is Brandon puts a lot of freaking thought into these bookends. Puts a lot of teeny tiny little references that is very easy to miss.
You'd think with a book this long it wouldn't be so fucking dense, but it is.
And
it's 1,200 pages of just boom references, boom foreshadowing, boom boom, and then the least dense parts are just the kick-ass action scenes, which everybody loves too.
Other thing to note, moving away from realmatic theory and talking kind of about investiture and stuff. Investiture has kind of take up three physical forms: gas, vapor. Gas/vapor,
liquid and solid.
Liquid and solid. Thank you. I forgot my science 101.
So can I interject for
yes.
just a second? There's way more states than that.
Yes, I know.
There's 12 different solid states for iron. No, not iron. Is it ice? I don't know. There's multiple different solid states, right? You've got alpha phase, beta phase. Anyway, go on ahead.
Brandon only talks about three.
I know.
Okay. Shard plate. When shard plate is described, they always talk about the high princes painting their shard plate. And Dalinar's really the only one who leaves it in that natural slate gray color. That is a sign that it's metal, one of the forms that Investiture takes physically in the Cosmere. So that is important. I think everything else we can kind of leave for another episode. We can talk about Mistborn. There's a little bit more with the kind of Mistborn tie-in, but I think...
What? Is it quick?
No,
okay.
It is not quick.
So we've got a toddler about to break in on recording session. You can even see the handle.
Yes, I know. It's been doing that actually a couple times. So go ahead. Do your end notes.
Oh, God. Thanks, audience, for audiencing with us. Thanks, AJ, for casting with
Thanks
me.
for podcasting with me.
We've been Cosmere Casual. Please reach out to us. Our email address is cosmerecasual@gmail.com. Our handle on whatever social medias we're on is just Cosmere Casual, Reddit, Instagram, YouTube. Our intro and outro music is licensed through Tribe of Noise. The artist is Ketsa, and the song is Odyssey.
And until next time, keep your wits about you.
I still love that we're at that point where it's like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah.